finding, spaces for businesses. So now, like when you renovate those buildings, right? Part of the challenge in retail, right? It's like the average retail lease or existence of a
Mhm.
business is like less than 4 years, right? So the challenge is how do you make that space flexible enough so that it can be successful for multiple retail tenants? Because statistically, you're probably going to have multiple retail tenants. If you could
Yeah.
do it right, and you put it in the right community and it fits the right services and needs of that community, that business could be there for a long time.
Welcome back to the Massive Passive Cash Flow Podcast. I'm Gary Wilson, your host. So glad to have you back listening to the show or watching if that's the case on YouTube or Facebook or what have you. We're glad to have you. We got a great guest today, Kurt Volkman from beautiful Chicago area up in Illinois. It's a great place to be. I've been up there many times. And by the way, Kurt is an architect and one of the most famous architects in the history of the world. He actually used to live in West Chicago, and there's a whole neighborhood there. You can go and see all those old houses. And in any case, I've always been interested in this subject, and this is very timely because what we're going to talk about today, guys, is what's going on in our industry right now as we speak. So first off, Kurt, sorry for the long introduction, but thank you for joining me. I know this is a special treat for us because of what you bring to the table, and it's very rare that we have an architect, anyways. So I just want to really give you a personal thank you and a professional thank you too.
Well, thank you for having me, Gary. I appreciate it. Anything I can do to help enlighten what we do on our side of the table that can help all your podcast listeners, that'd be awesome.
Let's go ahead and dive in. You know, most people aren't really familiar with how integral architecture is in the real estate industry. I mean, it's not just homes. I mean, people generally who build luxury homes, there's an architect involved, but really there's a lot more to it. Schools, churches, industrial space, you know, downtown office space, space that is going to be repurposed because of things like the pandemic changing people's behavior. So there's a lot more to it than meets the eye. But can you talk a little bit about the last few years in the behavioral changes in our society, how that really impacts and kind of gives guidance and direction to the world of the real estate industry, and architecture is a huge part because that's architecture is what makes it all happen. It's what how the manifestation of that works. Is that so? If you don't mind, kind of give us some background, and then we can jump into this maybe with some current things you're working on.
Sure. No, absolutely. One of the pandemic was hard for everybody, right? We got everything thrown, on our keisters during that time. But I think the one thing that was really positive that I saw coming out of the pandemic was the straight fact that people started using their front porches again. And we couldn't get close to people. We couldn't do anything, but you could go out on your front porch and you can wave to your neighbor, and it was all of a sudden you're like, hey, we're realizing why our old houses were designed the way we were, right? Before air conditioning, before TVs. Like I live in a 1904 house that's been
Mhm.
fixed up over the years. Not by me. I'm not that handy. But I will say that, what's nice about it is you're out there and you're enjoying that space, right? And then being
Mhm.
connected to your community. So I think that's the one thing that we saw starting to form in the pandemic that's still there today, which is really nice, is
Mhm.
that, people are searching for that sense of community and belonging. And where I think that helps the building owners of the future and developers is people want that community, and that community has a direct relationship to retention in terms of re-upping leases. So when we're designing new buildings, we're looking at renovations, we're looking at opportunities, and this is every income level, this is every age group. How do we
Mhm.
generate more community and find opportunities to do that, whether it's, communal spaces within, building properties or even spaces within a building. For those of
Mhm.
us who still have winter, it's an opportunity to get people together and understand. And when people feel connected to a community, they tend to stay in that place longer. And that's just one of those things that's great, right? What can you do to, kind of make your building tie into the local fabric? Is really
Mhm.
important. That's one of the big lessons I've taken coming out of the pandemic.
Yeah. Well, it's such an interesting subject because we have a lot of people on the podcast listening who are, they're dentists and they're just trying to learn more, maybe learn how can this help them invest? How can this help them, have a better workspace, that kind of thing. The agents are thinking of, I'm trying to find these people a home. They're just not seeing anything that they like.
Hmm.
But really, a lot of it does come back to, how events drive our behavior, and our behavior drives what our needs and wants are. In the case of houses like the front porches, I remember as a kid, that was normal. I mean, our grandparents all had porches. Very few of them had, air conditioning back then.
Hmm.
But we hung out on the porch, front porch, back porch, played in the front yard. And then with the onset of television and air conditioning, everybody kind of went indoors. So, so going forward, when we look at the industry today, um, one of the greatest needs is housing. We just have a shortage of housing.
We
And
do.
in my opinion is, I know that we would always like to have more luxury housing, but the reality is I think the greater portion of that need is on the affordable side. Affordable housing is such a tremendous need right now. But how do you, in your sector of architecture, is there any movement underfoot to address that? I mean, how do we get people to build or convert more space to affordable housing? I don't know the answer, but anything that you're seeing yourself, or any ideas that were coming out of the world of architecture?
Yes. No, I think what's going on in society, we talk about, in the government level. So the biggest challenge in affordable housing today
Mhm.
is in order to get return on investment, you have to basically own it for a very long time. The cost of construction materials and cost of construction labor, whether it's union, non-union, it's still high, right? And the materials costs are high, and they've kind of stayed, pretty high even after the pandemic compared to where we were before the pandemic. There's various reasons for all that, you know, geopolitical and otherwise.
Mhm.
The biggest challenge that we get into, though, is when you look at the cost of construction to build affordable housing, you can't build high rises, right? Without subsidy.
Mhm.
You can't even build mid rises without subsidy. And you're almost at the point where you can't even build, low rise construction, 2 to 3 stories without subsidies. And those subsidies have to
Yeah.
come city, state, and federal. So in this market right now that we're dealing with, these subsidies are highly competitive. Everybody's wanting a piece of these. I'm
Mhm.
working on a project currently. It's a historic building in Chicago. It meets all the criteria. It's a type of building the city of Chicago has even said, hey, we want to preserve these types of buildings for affordable housing, low income residents. Great. We do all the process, we fill
Mhm.
out all the paperwork, we jump through all the hoops, and then we even got rejected for the 9% tax credit, from the state because there's
Mhm.
just such demand out there for these tax credits that exist. Because, yes, we do need 7.5 million housing units to satisfy demand, and a lot of those are in the affordable and workforce housing. But the challenge
Yeah.
is everybody is trying to figure out a way to finance a project. So,
Yeah.
right now banks aren't lending the way we hope they would. You talk to older developers, they remember what it was like when interest rates were 6%, and they were like, okay, yeah, we know how to do this. We don't necessarily want to do this. So
Yeah.
I couldn't tell you the first thing about finance. I know it's a challenge. Everybody tells me that's the challenge out there right now. It's just the financing makes it really hard and difficult to do. And then government subsidies are all tied up. So whether it's, tied up at the federal level, tied up at the state levels or whatever, everything's competitive, really hard to get that financing. So everybody's looking for alternate ways to finance projects. I have one
Mhm.
client who just got a deal financed in Chicago, and he felt it was like a 15 round boxing match just to get the financing done. And it took extra long
Yeah.
in doing it. So are people trying to find capital overseas? Yes. Are people trying to find, local capital? Yes. Are people trying to find, any sort of government subsidy? The answer is yes. It's everywhere and it's tough. So I totally get it. So
Yeah.
then that puts some pressure on us to make sure we're designing the most efficient buildings possible, not only on the front end, but also finance, building buildings that are operate in the most efficient way so that it reduces the
Yeah.
kind of operating expenses overall.
Yeah. Well, I've got so many questions. One of them is on the like financing, grants, subsidies, things like that. is most of what you're seeing at the state level and local level, or anything at the federal level that you're aware of?
Well, supposedly there's a new workforce housing tax credit deal kind of informing in Congress. I don't know too much about it yet. I know it's in its infancy, but they want to do that similar to the low income tax credit housing financing options. HUD 221, I know it takes forever. You kind of go through the ringer just to do that. That financing, and then obviously at the state levels too, it's got the same, kind of challenges. So there are different ways to do it, and people are coming up with different strategies to do it at the state level. So different states have
Yeah.
different ideas on how they want to do it. And then, other, municipalities and states are also changing their zoning codes to try to get more units, whether it's additional dwelling units or, uh, you know, basically eliminating zones of single family housing so that you can build multiple units on there. But it's an issue that is multi-generational, which is kind of the challenge, right? Because not one type of house fits all. So I mean, the houses in need have different points of view. You're going to need family housing. You're going to need, basically senior housing. You're going to need empty nester housing, and at all economic levels, and pretty much
Mhm.
everywhere. And the more that they can be tied to public transportation or other things, great. But they're not always going to be that way. So the housing has to get near jobs and near, kind of shopping and near municipal needs, and it's a difficult world, and finding sites is key right now. So we work with developers all the time, just trying to find sites and ask the what if questions. And sometimes it's an existing building.
Did you know that you can participate in class every Monday? We call it Monday Night Live, 7 p.m. Eastern, with me and dozens of other investor agents from around the country, in fact, the world. Every Monday, totally free. No selling, no recruiting, just straight up education on anything and everything in real estate. And we have a lot of good guests coming on once or twice a month, bringing in expertise on subjects like how to buy a house with crypto. Okay. How about them apples? What about AI? How's AI affecting our business? How about the metaverse, blockchain processing? We're already using it in title work. So come on to Monday Night Live. Be ready to take notes and ask questions because it's live and engaging, and you get to participate by asking questions and meeting others. So we'll see you there. Go to GaryRealEstateWithGaryWilson.com. Click on the resource tab, drop down, and you'll see Monday Night Live. And in there, you can see one of the most recent classes. But more importantly, you can register for class as many as you want going up to like the end of the year, I believe. So in any case, do that. We'll see you on Monday Night Live. Look forward to meeting you in person. Take care. That helps. Another subject I have when it comes to affordable housing is, so I think you said, I've heard estimates from 4 million to 7 million. I think it's more on the high side because there are people that we really don't have accounted for in the country right now. And I'm not making a political statement. It's just a fact. I mean, we all know
Right.
it. So how much is that affecting the real numbers? I guess time will tell eventually. But when it comes to um, the product, like the affordable housing itself, we can either repurpose existing properties or we can build new. And then you're looking at land availability, neighborhoods, what will zoning allow, what will zoning not allow, occupancy codes and all that. Well, let's just talk about material first. Are
Sure.
there materials that you're seeing that you have access to, or the builders would have access to, that you as the architect can utilize or recommend in the design work that allows for either less expensive building costs, more efficient building costs? Like, hey, we can build this in 10% of the time because of these materials. Anything on the horizon you're aware of? I know we've seen a lot more metal in the last few years than wood. I don't know if that's just a temporary thing or if
No,
it's a trend
that
that's
is a
going to last.
function of the market. When NAFTA went away, all of a sudden wood prices started, getting squirrely on us. So there's days
Uh,
I have contractors telling me, lumber is cheaper than metal stud, and then there's, 2 weeks later they'll say, no, it's the inverse, right? Metal stud's cheaper. I think it's stabilized to the most point there. So, I
yeah.
mean, the biggest challenge that you have in affordable housing is kind of like I said, that return on investment, and that drives
Hmm.
sometimes how you build these things. So, yes, is there ways to build the better mousetrap? In this case, is there ways to build the better affordable housing? So, I think the
Hmm.
challenge that you have is these buildings need to be durable, right? Because if you have a longer hold as a building owner to get your return on investment, you need to not spend so much on operating expense and maintenance, right? So
Right.
we want to build durable as much as we can. And certain codes, especially if you're getting subsidies from any number of government agencies, they might then start putting requirements upon you to say, hey, you've got to build with these materials because we need this building to hold up. So we're
Mhm.
always looking at strategies, whether it's modular construction. My firm, HED, has a modular construction project going on right now in
Mhm.
California, building, delivering a lot of modular units into a site and getting the housing up faster. We have other opportunities where you're talking panelized construction. So a lot of the walls are kind of built in segments and then shipped to the site and then arranged that way faster so that, we can increase speed to market. There's other opportunities where we're looking at just lightweight construction overall. What can we do, and how do we maximize the density that way? And it gets tough, right? Because at a certain point, you want to build safe housing, but at the same time, what can you afford? Once that building gets above 3 stories, you got to start thinking about an elevator. Well, that building starts because it might get too expensive in terms of that return
Yeah.
on investment. So higher would be better if we could, but the challenge of what that means and what that necessarily necessitates in terms of vertical circulation becomes tough. Uh,
Yeah.
so it's just tough. It's tough, and you got to work with municipalities and cities. So you're always trying to figure out what's the fastest way I can get it done, what's the most durable way I can get it done, and then how do I make sure it's energy efficient so that
Yeah.
that energy efficiency, both in a passive sense, like in terms of insulation and roofs and walls, and lower energy costs in terms of light fixtures you use, mechanical systems you use. I mean, you want your furnace to be efficient as possible. Try to get Energy Star. Well, that all costs money too. So
Yeah.
there's never an easy way. And you're like, oh, well, maybe it's easier and less expensive in the South than the North, right? Because the South is just warmer. And it's not the case. It is basically a lot of the same cost everywhere. You're just treating a different condition.
Right. Yeah. I've seen it just in the last 10 years. Um, we've seen tiny homes pop up on the scene, and there's different manufacturers making them now. And I forget all the different names, but they truly are tiny. But people are looking at a price tag of say $60,000. Now you still have to land to put it somewhere,
Right.
but they're looking at that versus whatever the average price of a home now, probably 300 something thousand dollars. That's a huge difference. But the other thing we're seeing, and this is really startling because it's like right out of a science fiction movie from a generation ago, is it looks like they're container, the buildings that are not just 2, 3 stories, but 9, 10, 12 stories, and they're being brought in containers and set on top of each other. And it literally looks like, if you look closely, a series of tractor trailer, the storage compartments stacked on top of each other and cantilevered and stuff like that with windows at the end. I'm like, man, this is just like the stuff we used to see in the sci-fi movies when I was a kid. But
And each one of those segments is coming out fully decked out, fully finished, and it's literally
yeah,
just making connections. So it's modular construction is a wonderful process. It just the
okay,
challenge is it kind of comes out of the old, the areas where you get modular construction kind of come out of the old RV factories. And it's the same groups, they basically retool factories and they're building these kind of modular. So you
uh,
see a lot of it in, kind of northwest or northeast Indiana. You see some of it out in Idaho, you see some out in California. And I'm sure there's more across the country, but those are the ones I've kind of dealt with when looking at this. And it can be really a great idea. It takes a lot of work on my part up front because I've got to make sure it's designed properly, and all the Lego parts and pieces all fit together,
yeah,
right? And
mhm,
then you also have to get the code officials out there to approve the building in the factory and then approve the building again once it's on site and constructed. So there's extra
yeah,
steps to this whole process, but it can save time and get you into a building and get you, kind of fully operational faster if you know what you're doing.
yeah. I wanted to ask you too. Uh, I know we touched. We're obviously been talking about affordable housing, but the term Maui, MAUI, mixed
Yes.
age use
Yeah.
income. Can you shed a little more light on that?
Yes. Working on a project currently in Chicago, the Lathrop Homes, working with a developer related Midwest. It's a wonderful
Mhm.
project where we're basically renovating a whole series of buildings and delivering a third affordable, a third workforce, and a third market rate. And that's one
Okay.
strategy for financing affordable is to try to vary the income levels of your development to do this, right? And we're still working with the CHA and the Department of Housing and all that on top of it. But when you look at these sites, and this site has the advantage that it's tied to a couple bus routes in the city of Chicago. So it's easy access into the site, get into downtown, get into other neighborhoods, get to places of business. So when you look at a Maui, mixed age, use, and income. So you think of the neighborhood you potentially grew up in, right? What'd you have? You had a
Mhm.
whole series of families, different ages. They all work together, right? Nowadays, suburbs are a little homogenized, right? They tend to be all kind of the same age and tend to be all the same income, right? Where this mixed age, use, and income is great because you should have a walkable community of different age groups, potentially different income levels to kind of satisfy different needs within that community. It's like kind of taking on the role of that 15-minute city concept in urban planning that's been out there where everything you should need in life is within a 15-minute walk of your place. This is, in a way, we like to talk about it more as an 18-hour community where everything you have is within from 6 a.m. to midnight. It's all there, and different pockets of your neighborhood are all activated at different times of day. And this is great for the retail, tenants because they love it because they have foot traffic at different,
Mhm.
various points a day. So when we look at these big master developments like this, we're looking, hey, where can I maybe put a medical office building, or where can I make sure there's a coffee shop, or maybe this would be a great space, for a nightclub, and find different ways where we can do this, tying it to transit in some way if possible, or at least having beneficial traffic patterns to get people,
Mhm.
to places, but more or less try to create a mini neighborhood in and of itself that people then want to come to as a destination.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned 15-minute city and 18-hour city. So the 15-minute city is more of the older, the prior philosophy, is that right? And then the 18-hour is more of the newer, uh, things
It
open.
really,
In other words,
the 18-hour city is kind of a variant on the 15-minute city, just looking at, I tend to look at it like, yes, I got to make it great for the resident, but we got to make it great for the businesses as well, and got to make it
Mhm.
great for the landlords. So that's where the 18-hour city comes in because I used to design a lot of malls. So when you're designing retail malls, foot traffic is the king. So when we see retail malls today and they're selling off their outlots for multifamily apartment buildings so that they can basically bring people to the mall on a daily basis, and that's literally their walking path, and they're bringing that foot traffic. That's how these malls are kind of becoming viable again, right? So in that kind of same idea, how do you do that to a new development or into, let's say you had, a 10-acre development. How do I do this so that that new 10-acre development reinvigorates the whole neighborhood it's fitting into?
Yeah. Well, I want to just drop back a second, back to the Maui. So mixed
Sure.
age, mixed use, mixed income. So mixed use, is that when I hear that, I think back to when I first started investing, it was in Pittsburgh. Well, it was Virginia Beach, but then it was Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh's an older Rust Belt city. It's really
Sure.
nice now. It's not at all like you would imagine it was based
Hmm.
on what the pictures showed in the 70s. It's modern, it's got higher education, great medical presence there. Uh, technology, even finance as a financial subcenter. But some of the buildings I bought were mixed use. Downstairs, you'd have like a barber shop or a small restaurant and a gift store, and then maybe 3 floors of apartments. So when you say mixed use, is that what you're describing there too? Mixed age, mixed income, and mixed uses,
Exactly.
multi-purpose.
Yeah,
Gotcha. Okay.
finding, spaces for businesses. So now, like, when you renovate those buildings, right, part of the challenge in retail, right, it's like the average retail lease or existence of a
Mhm.
business is like less than 4 years, right? So the challenge is how do you make that space flexible enough so that it can be successful for multiple retail tenants? Because statistically, you're probably going to have multiple retail tenants. If you could
Yeah.
do it right and you put it in the right community and it fits the right services and needs of that community, that business could be there for a long time. But reality says, hey, let's try to make that, make sure it's flexible in all of this. So I think that's part of the
Mhm.
goal of this. But yes, in all, the mixed use is could be that, that barber shop or the nail salon,
Yeah.
insurance shop. I think some of the challenge of that is zoning, though. The zoning codes in cities right now, some they get out of date real fast and they don't keep up with market conditions. Like there's still municipalities that I go to and you're like, you haven't changed the zoning code. It feels like since before Amazon really took off, right? So then,
Yeah.
we think about even before the pandemic, retail was giving back 30% of its square footage. So what do you do with that first floor of your building? The last thing you want in any development is a vacant first floor, especially at nighttime. It's just not safe. So how do we find ways that we can invigorate that retail and keep it viable and make it flexible? And a lot of times that's saying, hey, maybe I'm not going to provide that much. So
Yeah.
when you have an existing building that does have some of that retail in the base, and you're looking at it as an investment, and you're like, can I lease that consistently, and does that lease make sense? Then we
Hmm.
start looking at other things you can do with that. Is there a way that it becomes amenity for the building that generates that same communal aspect that we're looking for? What, can it be in a fitness center for the building, or can it be something that the building can use, storage, you name
Right.
it, anything that could be viable for the building to give it a better sense of community would be the secondary outcome. But again, that
Yeah.
drives rent then goes up because of that. So
Yeah. Well, when it comes to livability, comfort, and ultimately what I'm getting at is retention here. Of the things you've worked on so far, and I've still got a lot of questions, by the way. I'm starting to get mixed up in
mhm,
my head, but I want to talk about new construction and development versus repurposing an older building. But
sure.
before we do that, have you been able to implement some of the design work, with the new, philosophy that allows for a greater retention? Because you're right, investors at some point they need to make money or they're not going to be interested in building these things and financing them. They need to see, so maybe longer term, and that's okay. We're all getting used to that. But what kind of retention rates are you seeing? And then what's really a factor that drives that? What are some of the factors, Mm.
Well, I think it's a good question. So I think industry wide retention is roughly in the, kind of mid 50% range, right? And
Mhm.
ideally, some of these big institutional investors are trying to find ways to get it up into the mid 60s if possible, right? Or even higher.
Mhm.
So I'll be honest with you. I think some of the things that we try to do are not necessarily specific in terms of chasing one specific demographic. But I
Mhm.
think what I try to do, for instance, one project that I designed, brand new construction in Denver that I worked on almost a decade ago now, is we took kind of the point of view is like, okay, this is in an up and coming burgeoning neighborhood in Denver. How do we make this a place where we kind of look at the demographics and we said, okay, these are going to be college grads and, kind of young professionals that want to live here. So I was like, okay, how do I make this building safe? And that's
Mhm.
safety, right? Safety is important, and it's part of that is giving reasons to stay in the building, right? You want to keep them on property as much as possible,
Mhm.
so great amenities within that building, but then even the surrounding the building. When that person gets dropped off at a ride share, what allows them to go from that ride share into the lobby? What's that clean thing? So I'm in a lot of ways safety in terms of how it fits into the environment is important, especially if you have retail and all these other things in the base. That particular
Mhm.
building had live work units, so there were small businesses that were operating in there. So how do we make sure they don't have theft problems or other issues? Or there's strange people coming and going at night that maybe the other residents don't want. So really
Yeah.
thinking about the disparate uses and how you can kind of create general zones, keep it well lit, keep it secure, keep it, kind of viewed on a camera, and make sure that everything is safe and secure. And that to me was important because then I knew women would want to be there more so than not necessarily guys wouldn't, but women would want to be there and thinking of
Yeah.
safety, right, as a vulnerable group of individuals. And one thing we know about women, and this was kind of called out on a statistic from the New York Times back in 2023, women
Mhm.
spend more on rent than men do. overall,
Mm,
more of their percent of their income. They spend like close to 46% of their income
mhm.
on rent, where men spend roughly about 38. So guys
Yeah,
maybe willing to accept a little less safety, a little less, amenity and all that kind of stuff compared to women.
yeah,
So if you have a group and then you look at statistics about who damages and what causes, guys were bad. But
yeah,
if you can make a space safe for women, you make a space that's safe for everybody, right?
yeah,
And I think that's important when we think about it. And when then we start thinking about affordable housing and having these people, you have young families, you have elderly, you have, everybody that falls into the affordable world. We need to make our housing such that it's checking off the list of things that they need to not worry about. Safety is a big concern on that. And
yeah,
that's to me one of those drivers of retention is if a person feels safe and comfortable in a space, like they know, hey, I can go here, that's my refuge, they're going to stay there more times than not, right? As long as the rent doesn't get out of whack or some of their
yeah,
personal dynamics change, they're able to say, hey, this is a good place for me to be because I feel safe and
yeah, yeah. Hey, I want to touch on like new construction, new development versus rehabbing or repurposing an older building. There's probably no way to really answer it with one straight answer, but is there overall, in your experience, is one way better than the other? I mean, is it depend on the use, or how do you determine which route to take when we're trying to develop and provide this affordable housing? You know?
in terms of affordable housing, what each way has an advantage and disadvantage, right? In
Hmm.
terms of looking at maybe speed to market and maybe reducing some of the costs, renovating an existing apartment building and bringing it up to, a new modern standard isn't a bad way to go.
Hmm.
The challenge comes when you're taking a building that wasn't necessarily housing before and converting
Hmm.
it to housing. That's where the challenge is. So, like in office, you've probably seen a whole bunch of articles that exist out there about converting, office space to housing. The challenge in
Hmm.
that is, because we've studied it, we're doing it, is about 25% of office buildings are really convertible to housing, where the rest really aren't. And that makes it a challenge. And even then, the cost of buying that building has to be low enough to offset the cost of renovation. And there's a lot of pitfalls in doing that. I mean, that could be a whole separate podcast episode, to be honest with you. So when
Yeah.
we're looking at renovation, you've got advantages. Speed to market, because you don't have to build walls, exterior walls, hopefully, and you got foundations and you got existing systems. You can just kind of, clean them up, improve them, get it back on there. So you're really dealing with more interior construction. Maybe you're redoing roofs, things like that, but things that can get done quicker. Then when you're doing new construction, it's going to take longer, but then you have the advantage of building to what the current marketplace demands in terms of what their
Okay.
housing offers. So sometimes in renovation, you can't always provide everything that the market demands. And yeah, I'd love to build an A plus affordable housing unit, an A plus workforce housing unit, or market rate or above. But sometimes in renovations, that isn't always the case. It can be, and we always strive to. I mean, we want to make the best housing possible, for every client of ours and every possible resident. So I think the challenge really becomes, are there trade-offs one way or the other? The cost of new construction typically is higher, and that drives rent. And unless you're building it very specifically for affordable housing, then sometimes that could be a challenge in terms of affordability and access.
Yeah. Well, I know we're getting close on time here, but I can't help but wonder. I mean, you're of course in Illinois right now, and you were in Colorado before. Is there any networking and collaboration going on between architectural firms across the country? Like maybe that the association is itself addressing affordable housing. Is any of that underfoot? Anything started there?
Yes, there's many different organizations. I was at a conference last week in Illinois called Leading Age, and it's a national organization, and that's really a conference centered on, basically providing affordable senior living opportunities and
Hmm.
what that means. There's other, conferences and firms I've dealt with where we're kind of tandem building affordable housing in a different state. So I mean, currently right now I'm working in me personally working in Florida, Texas, Kansas, Chicago markets. Our firm in general has projects in Kentucky, LA, Denver, you name it. We're all over the place working on it. That's the joy of working in a big firm. You have access to do work all over the place.
Hmm.
So we're seeing it a lot of times with subsidies that exist. We have to find local partners. So we do kind of work, kind of in tandem with other firms, both architects, engineers, finding ways we can build housing together, sharing ideas, both on regionality and in terms of cost of construction. And someone's always, figuring out a new method of doing something. So it's always good to, kind of hear about it and understand it. And I think especially in the affordable housing world, people are more willing to share because there is this greater passion to make sure we're getting some of those, millions of housing units back into the marketplace that everybody can have.
Yeah. Well, I'm so glad it's happening. And I know that people are probably wondering, "Well, why hasn't this happened already?" It's just, it's, the old saying, it's hard to turn a battleship. I
It's
mean,
so
plus in the
hard.
country, yeah, we've got multiple things we're dealing with. We're in an election year.
Mhm.
We've came through a pandemic. If it just got you've got a couple of wars going around the world, and you know, I want to kind of emphasize though for everybody listening, it doesn't mean that you should be scared and be afraid and things like that. You definitely want to be informed,
Mhm.
but think through, how can these things affect the marketplace and how can you participate? Because if you're listening to the podcast, you're probably a business owner, maybe a professional who wants to invest in real estate or already is investing in real estate, or you're a real estate agent who's trying to figure out how do you, modify your model to adjust to the changing business climate in the industry. And this is why we have the podcast. But you know, if you really understood the industry of building, whether it's office space, retail, residential, what have you, you know, everything starts with the architect. I mean, and it don't just come up with nice, fancy designs. They do that. Believe me, I've always admired architects. I design houses for fun myself, but they actually understand what's going on in the marketplace. They understand the behavior, human behavior in an office environment, in a home environment, how that's affecting design. So, and it's material costs, it's labor costs. The methodology of manufacturing is a big factor in all this too. That's likely going to be changing, guys, in the near future. How we actually create buildings, manufacturing them, manufacturing is going to be changing. So keep that in mind. I suggest it's part of what you do to study and learn. So, Kurt, I'll let you take us across the finish line here. Uh, anything. Is there a way for people to learn more from you and maybe engage with your firm? Or just in general stay more informed or in words of advice you can share before we sign off here.
Sure. No, absolutely. There's obviously architects everywhere. You can Google architecture firm in your city and you'll get a list of probably like, 40 of them in every major city plus, right? 40 plus. And a lot of firms have been doing it for a lot of years. And, we specialize in a lot of different things too. So it's not just housing, but
Mhm.
the you know, you look up organizations like the American Institute of Architects. You can even look up in major cities like Chicago Department of Housing and just see what
Mhm.
their criteria is. For instance, I'm working on a project down in South Florida. I went to grad school in Florida. I haven't built in Florida in a little bit, so I'm researching down there, just understanding. Even one of the greatest tools, if you really understand housing and want to understand what people are building, I literally can go into Google Earth, city I'm curious about. I'm doing street view looks at houses and neighborhoods. Like how are they building it, and what less am I learning from what they're kind of building in there? And how old is the house I'm looking at or building I'm looking at? How old is, kind of the streets that they're on? Is, you can tell the level of investment that municipality is playing into that.
Mhm.
And is that then become a somewhere where someone would want to invest and understand what
Yeah,
that means? Because, sometimes investment, they're asking you to carry impact fees on these investments, and sometimes that kills a deal. So, I
yeah,
would say to me, understanding kind of where some of that is. So there's definitely uh, organizations like ULI, American Institute of Architects, all that have great amount of free information that exists out there that people can go search out and find and learn about. how developers see the world, architects see the world, engineers see the world, and so forth. And I think
Mhm.
that's incredibly helpful to understand what we see and what we're seeing and kind of things that we're advocating for. So maybe that changes how you think about what you might be investing in.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate that. I appreciate you sharing everything you shared. You definitely, you brought the fire today. So, and it's so cool because, you know, if you really understand, again, I'll say this again to the listeners, um, the architectural industry is really sort of the guy behind the curtains. There's a lot going on that we're just not aware of because we're only used to seeing what's in front of us, which is the house, the office building, the gas station, what have you. But believe it or not, there's a lot that goes on behind the scenes. And cities rely on architectural firms to make sure things are, not only compliant with codes and regulations and occupancy and things like that and zoning, but also, the livability of a town or a city. How attractive is it? How comfortable is it? That all starts with the architects, guys. So, in any case, take Kurt's advice, check things out, do your own education. Thank you for listening or watching if that's the case, and thank you again, Kurt. God bless all of you and your loved ones, and we will see you on the next Massive Passive Cash Flow podcast.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Massive Passive Cash Flow. Be sure to go to realestatewithgarywilson.com to join our community and start building wealth today.